things were different when you got out in the field.
What was your impression?
Oh yes, when I was picked to fly the Volpar in Saigon, we went up to Tainan, where they had this new Volpar Air Asia, the huge O&R, overhaul and repair facility the company had at Air Asia, had modified and got the subcontract from Volpar to change our 10-2s, or Beechcrafts, twin Beaches, into Volpars, and made it into the tricycle landing gear, the better plane. So we went up there, and Volpar's chief pilot, Dick Hansen, came out to Taipei and then down to Tainan, and we checked out in the that conversion and did all our work down at Kaohsiung, and I got maybe, I don't remember, 5, 6, 7 flights. We all went up together and we all made our landings and learned how to fly the machine, mainly handle the engines because they were the Garrett turboprop engines. And we checked out, and we were the first pilots, for the line pilots for the company to check out. Don Kostev checked us out, gave us our check ride, line check, and then we went back to Saigon. And as the Volpar modification planes came into Saigon, we were flying both Twin Beach and Volpars, and eventually just the Volpar. Well, that came about because they had a new program up in Udorn called the HARP, H-A-R-P, short for High Altitude Relay Project, that was set up to be run out of Udorn at Savannah Kit. And at that time, it was to relay information along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to a radio platform very high, and bounce it back over to Nakhon Phanom, and we would keep track of the influx of all the traffic, because all the supplies that went into South Vietnam came down the Ho Chi Minh Trail from North Vietnam and through the jungles and the karsts and into the plains, and they did it mostly at night. Well, anyway, this project was going to use the Volpar and put about 650 gallons of gas fuel in the back so that the relay could be done automatically. Well, I was sent up to Tainan to check out some new co-pilots that they crews for this project. So I was up there for about 10 days and checked out the pilots, and then the 2 or 3 planes had to be flown to Vientiane and then down to Udorn. And they asked me to ferry one of the planes, so I did, and ferried it over to Udorn, and we landed in the afternoon, and I met Jim Ryan, who was the chief pilot of special projects in Udorn. And I said to Jim, gee, I sure would like to join this project. It looks interesting to me, and it's why really more of why I wanted to come over. And he said, okay. And I went to the bar, the Air America bar, Club Rendezvous. About an hour later, Jim came in and tapped me on the shoulder. He said, you belong to me now. He got me transferred just like that. So I was in the project, and I went back to Saigon about a month later to get my gear and get somebody to take over my apartment, and that's the last time I ever went to Saigon. And that's how I got brought into the project.
And that was okay with you?
Oh, I was delighted. Oh yeah, it was wonderful. I met Pete Parker, your dad, and Jim Ryan and Burl King. They were there, and we flew together. And I ended up flying the Volpar on some these relay missions. In fact, 3 of them stand out in particular. I flew from the first, second, and third nights. We'd go down there in a short tour, and I flew 3 all-nighters in a row, 3 14-hour flights, taking off at 5 and landing at 7 the next morning. And we had to, of course, use oxygen and climb up, and it was quite interesting in a way, because you got to hear the messages when they came through from the ground troops. The fellows that were stuck along the trail, hidden, had little radio transmitters, and they made it simple for them to count trucks and troops and bicycles, whatever, and they pushed the button with the number and it would come up and we would hear a little song that went, "A hunting you will go, a hunting you will go, hi-ho the dairy-o, a hunting." Well, whenever we heard that, it was a message coming through us back. And the more of those hunting we will goes, the more business we got. Well, in the meantime, while we're doing all this, while we were observing, believe it, the fireworks of the war, which wasn't, of course, there was an awful lot of anti-aircraft fire along the trail. And of course, the Nimrod B-26s from NKP were, and the ADs that had been given to the Air Force were trying to knock out the guns. So we were sitting up there watching the whole thing, being vectored around in a square all this time as we cruise climbed up to about 20,000 feet to save fuel.
Was it usual for them to, did they know that, the enemy know that the project was going on, and did they try to shoot at you while
No,
you were climbing up?
I only maybe flew 25 or 30 of those missions, and I don't ever remember seeing any anti-aircraft fire our way. We were too high, and we were actually, maybe, you got to consider, we were maybe 10, 20, 30 miles away, but but we were, in order to make the relay platform work, and so we would actually be making a square circle, so to speak, in between the Mekong River over in the trail area up at an altitude in order to give it the proper bounce effect for the radio signals. No, we never experienced any problems with any aircraft fire in that project at all.
What were some of the other projects that you worked on?
Well, what happened is the company got a B-26, an on-mark converted B-26, and it was quite similar to the B-26 that I had flown at Raytheon, except this B-26 was a little different. It had a ramp in the back that opened up just like a Hercules or a Caribou or a drop ramp. And in the back of it, there was a rail where we could put 2 pallets to hold perhaps 500 pounds in each pallet. Well, this B-26 was also had a terrain following radar, TFR, that was a prototype copy of the F-111's terrain following radar. So what this meant was it was hooked into an autopilot, if you chose to use the autopilot, where we could fly right on the deck, right over the tops of the trees, which we did, because I remember Terry or somebody said, "Hey, I think, Frank, you're flying a little low. I see tree limbs." But at night, you got to remember we're flying at night. And we'd go in and with this terrain following radar and make these drops into a DZ, where the choppers had brought the troops in to record the passage. Well, they needed food, supply, arms, whatever, reading material, whatever they needed. Why, and we drop it to them. And I ended up getting to that project because probably of my B-26 experience. So I got taken out of the HARP project and put into this 586, a blue, we call it the Blue Goose, and I flew that. And Gene Huey, Burl, and I were picked to fly it, but I ended up doing most of the flying because Gene was flying the Caribou and making night drops, and Burl was second in command to Jim, and he was doing some other work. Lots of times we didn't know what each other did, and we didn't ask. And Burl could have been flying the Twin Otter or whatever, but they did some of the early flying, and we flew together. I flew with Burl. In fact, we got shot at making practice drops out of Savannah Kett. And I remember we came back that night and we're having a beer at the club, and I found out later that they sent the troops out from Savannah Kett to get the bad guys, and we were just practicing, making practice drops, but they were shooting at us. It was that B-26 mission was something else. We couldn't see out of it well enough to make good drops, and we were flying so fast we had to drop the VMC on it, or the minimum single engine speed, was up around 140 knots, 141 knots, compared to 120 on a regular B-26. So it had a much higher safe drop speed that we had to drop at. And even so, I would lower it below VMC to drop because it was so hard to hit the target because you had to lean over like flying a Corsair aboard ship with that long nose. Well, the B-26, the way it was set up, so we had to kind of fly in a skid and a turn to see the DZ lights. You know, they'd be a T or an L and lights in a little area to drop. And I imagine out of the 20 or so missions I flew, I probably didn't hit the DZ 5 times. I mean, it was too bad, but and it eventually was, the project was canceled. And that's how I ended up going into photo work, which I did mainly for Air America. Went from that to the photo. And the photo work was interesting in as much as that we took a Volpar and they cut holes in the bottom of it and stuck in old Fairchild K cameras. We had 3 of them to start out with, and we had an RC8 later, which was a more modern version camera. And the Volpar, we take off out of Udorn. Burl King checked me out in it, and I flew with Burl. But we take off like in the morning, 8 o'clock, say, so that we'd be up over where the sun was right. You know, it's between 9 and 3 o'clock where you get the best sun today. And all your pictures are in black and white, no color, because you get better definition for your 3D. And we'd take off in this Volpar, and we'd have the back seats would be loaded with magazines, and we'd be told what projects to take care of, and we used the Volpar for it.
Pretty successful program.
Yes, it was. We did Air America through the customer. Udorn had the photo recce squadron there. F-101s were doing the work, so we had the lab right there. Simple. We had a technician on loan from the Air Force in civilian clothes. The first one was Ken Hover, and then we had Don Mong. Well, these gents, they maintained those cameras, and we couldn't have done the program without them. I mean, they met us, they unloaded it, they took the magazines over, and they were immediately developed, and then the prints came back to the photo interpreters, and all this information went out to the Navy on the carriers, to the Air Force, to the Marines, whoever needed it. And we ended up getting actually more useful information. The information was very useful because even though the Air Force, the CIA had the U-2 and even the Big Bird, SR-71s, all of us, plus the Navy and Air Force had their photo recce birds. But Air America's Volpar ended up getting some of the best pictures, we were told, because we knew the country like the back of our hand. I mean, we didn't rotate. And I flew 569 missions, photo missions. And my first one was with Burl, my last one was in Burl with March. And you know, we did very good with our photo work. We flew at 10,000 feet, which ended up be like 7,000 above the ground, and we flew at 140 knots, which was slow. And we did mosaics. In fact, I remember going up and shooting the Golden Triangle, the largest poppy fields in the world. Beautiful, those flowers. And that's where it all came from. But we'd map that, and then we'd map the roads that they were, the bad guys were coming down through Laos. And the most famous, obviously, most of our work was over the Plain of Jars, the PDJ. But the other thing we did was the Chinese Road. And the Chinese Road, Sam Jordan and I found it the end of '67. I'm not saying we were the first ones to locate it, but we saw it and got pictures of it through the clouds. And that was the beginning of the famous Chinese Road that they built. And they had it going all the way down through Laos. And when I left in '73, it was almost to the border, to the Mekong. And that's where we got an awful lot of ground fire and anti-aircraft fire. And that's where a lot of the Air America planes were shot down over it because it was heavily defended. They grew gardens. They played basketball courts, volleyball courts. They had their gardens. they had their wives with them, and they had their guns with them. And they were pretty good. They were better than the other gunners. And it was unfortunate. And doing the photo recce work, the only way you get good pictures is to have the wings level. Because if you're tilted either way, then what you do with pictures is you overlap them and you look at them, and then it makes it 3D. But so if the wings are not level, it won't work. So it was consequently, to follow a road or to do anything, the idea was to fly as wings level as you could. Well, this also made it very easy for the gunners, because if you're flying straight and level, it's a lot easier for them to track you. So a lot of times, and we never got hit. It's amazing, because I remember Dave Waters flew with me most of the time, and he'd say, "Oh boy, we're getting it," and he could see the puffs coming behind us. They were walking up. And fortunately, he saw them, so we just break off. So. And at night, well, of course, we were lucky when I was doing some other work up at 20 alternate every now and do some radio relay at night. Why, when they'd shoot at us, they'd use tracers, and we could tell if they were leading us right. And whenever it looked like they were, we just turned. You know? I have one interesting story about one night we were up there doing some radio relay work up at the alternate when they were getting hit bad. And I got a call from Hillsborough or whoever, Moonbeam, I guess his call sign was Moonbeam, the big Air Force relay bird. He says, this is on emergency. He says, we got a MiG warning. We got a MiG night fighter coming in. Everybody leave the area. Well, I had done so much radar work and everything. I just dropped down above the top of the mountains. I knew he wouldn't come down because he couldn't see me in the ground clutter. So we just stayed there and kept the relay going. And then he finally left, and we climbed back up. But that's the only time I ever had a MiG actually come in. But I never saw him. He never saw us either, because the radar couldn't look down into the ground clutter.